years. So, I mean, when the time's right, I'll say what I need to say. And so I was thrust into the A&E campaign season. And the other thing is that I looked around me and I have been the youngest, this, that, and the other on these boards. And I said, well, if the A&E church can't elect an Ivy League educated person who served on the general board for 12 years, served in the World Methodist Council, how are they going to then elect? This investment in young adults means nothing. Then what we're talking about and trying to make the church intergenerational means nothing. So I'm here, I'm the test case for my generation. And I ran, and well, I won. I won by the largest margin in the history of the church for a contested office. Which is
That's a big deal.
it's a big deal.
I forgot to mention you're a Morehouse man.
Yes.
And so your training has helped you definitely become efficient and effective at your job. But John, talk about some of the challenges you see from where you sit that we face both internally and in your role externally as the AME Church.
Literally where I sit. So I'll just give this as a synopsis. No shade. But traditionally, general officers of the church, when we have a general meeting like this, you have the bishops, the general officers, and then the audience. In this meeting, we have the bishops and the general officers behind them. Nothing wrong with that. But when I'm trying to work or do my work, what happens has been that I have no power access. I have no Wi-Fi. Well, I have Wi-Fi, but I have no power. So I'm up there trying to do my typing, trying to put up the bulletins, talking to folk. My laptop goes dead. So they're like, well, go work in the VIP lounge. I'm like, but you don't want me to be on the dais to be seen. You're asking me to so it's like they're literally not wired for me to be in my seat. And I use that as a metaphor for how this church has dealt with millennials, because this structure that we have is not quite meant yet for personal generation. Same way businesses had to adapt for nursing mothers by having rooms where they could nurse. We had to adapt we had passed a whole raft of legislation for the American with Disabilities Act, where we had to make businesses ready for personal disabilities. The church has to figure out, what do we have to do to make ourselves accessible for millennials? So the structure that I see internally is everything from the pandemic has shown us we have to be more technologically savvy. We have to cut down on the meeting times, the meetings that we do. We have to cut down on certain behaviors, and we have to do other things. For instance, the technology at this meeting, and again, I will say this, we have been under huge constraints. Speaking as well as the leadership, I am intimately aware of the discussions that were held, but I always ask this, who's in the room? And until millennials are not only in the room, but at the table, we're going to go through some of these growing pains. Now, externally, I always take objection when people say, well, the church isn't in Black Lives Matter. No. Just because you don't see someone with a collar, a row of black men and the collars leading Black Lives Matter doesn't mean the church isn't there. It's just whose part of the church is there. The young adults who are in the Black Lives Matter movement aren't necessarily in our church leadership. So our members are out there.
They're just not talking about it.
Exactly. Or they're not, to us, they're not leaders, but to out there, they're leaders. So, I think that the Black church, we have to really take a good hard look at where we want to be, how we want to be there, and what our role in the community is right now.
How do you think the pandemic has impacted the work of the Christian Court?
Oh God. Well, we have been immensely blessed. I keep using the metaphor of Hepzibah, the widow who kept digging the oil out and like, pray, Lord, don't let the oil go out. Because the budget for media in the church is scant. In fact, when I took over, one of the bishops told me, how are you going to do your job? Because you don't have a wife, who's going to be your secretary? And aside from the questionable gender norms that statement raised, there was very real that, the tradition of men, you hire your family not because we're nepotism, but because your family's all that you could afford to hire. They're the only ones who will work for the pay that you're going to give them. But I've been blessed to have the resources to do programs like TCR Dialogues. TCR Dialogues began after the murder of George Floyd. I met one of my friends, Kiritiana Freelon, who's also a member of the AME Church. She is a journalist in Brazil, and her mother's a pastor in Chicago. And so I said, Kiana, I've seen some of your stuff. I like what you do. Can you help us do this? So she did the interviews, and so we started saying, okay, this is good. We may want to keep doing this. And now, 60 plus dialogues later, here we are. Because we wanted a way for the church to be able to see it some during the pandemic. And to be quite honest, I was trained in the mode like, okay, well, production to be like, all these cameras and all these lights, how can I afford this? And now I'm like, oh, so all I need is, a StreamYard, a good internet connection, quality equipment, good lighting, and we can do this.
And good people.
Good people, such as you, Mr. Seawright.
Thank you, sir. John, talk about, I guess, the work ahead for the church. What do you see as the biggest challenges as the church move forward? Because you, unlike some of the other people I've spoken to this week and in past dialogues, you're young. So the challenges you see may not be reflective of those who are more seasoned than you.
Very true. I tell people some of the reasons why I'm so vocal is because I say, I'm going to be here to live with the consequences of the mistake you're going to make while after you've gone on to glory. And so that's one of the reasons why I've been a vocal ally and advocate for this church to address its position on LGBTQIA equality. The data show us that our young members, we're going to lose a generation if we do not adjust our stance or to be honest, be more realistic and honest with where we are. The church is not being honest with itself. So that's one of the reasons why, and also our institution and its structure, the way we do business and what we invest in versus what we don't invest in has to shift. There was great criticism when some moves were made, and people are like, why do you do this? Why we do it? Why you getting rid of this? Why we do it? I'm like, don't you understand that? For instance, the paper used to print twice a month. When the publisher and I were elected together, we looked at it, we said, we don't have the content to run twice a month. We're killing ourselves with print bills. We need to go to once a month. Do you know people were upset that they didn't get their papers twice a month, even though we couldn't afford to do it? So and they were used to a product that they didn't understand and needed to ship. So I think that the church really has to take a good hard look at where it is right now. And my issue is that who's in the room? While we are one of the most progressive churches when it comes to young adult involvement in our decision makings, we've also made a tradition of tokenizing young adults. And our rooms need to be robust and diverse because there are some mistakes that we make because who was in the room. But the same way these companies do these racist things, and we're like, how could you do this racist propaganda? Because no one was in the room.
How can young people get more in the room, John, if they're not invited? Conventional wisdom would say, push through the door, but we're not living in conventional times, so that won't work. So how can more young people within the AME brand get more engaged, involved in the work and the decision-making rooms? Because there are different rooms in the house.
That's the thing, though. We do have a structure that works. The question is, how do you work it? One of the most beautiful things that happened in this church was the General Council in 1972, when the youth revolt took place. The youth revolt took place when a group of young adult clergy and laity, some of whom are retiring at this general conference, or retired in the last one, got together and said, we're tired of being in the balcony. We're tired of being excluded. We want our seat at the table. And they worked with the bishops and support of lay people and the general officers to be given access and a seat. That is why I sit in the seat today. They're the ones who fought to make sure that every annual conference elected at least one young adult. They're the ones who fought to make sure that the general board, every district had at least one young adult. And in 2012, we updated their legislation to make sure that young adult clergy, because due to some unique intricacies, clergy, young adults it was not to get too technical, but we had to have a different age for young adult clergy because to be delegate, you need an MDiv, and MDiv needs time, and that means that you're probably going to be a little bit older before you we don't have 30 years, basically the bottom line is we want to be inclusive and make sure that all young adults had a fair shot. So the structure exists. The issue is, do you wish to use the structure and do you find allies with you? I am proud to say that I was supported as a young adult by my annual conference. I was supported by Young Adults, my Episcopal district. And the structure did work for me, but there are so many places where the structure doesn't work. And so to the people who don't want us in the room, I tell people, get together, kick the door down.
You know, we're able to do these dialogues because of good people like Miss Joy Terry Hunter, who's been outstanding this week in helping us put together all these things. But my uncle mentioned, when I asked him about challenges going forward, he talked about technology being a thing, and allowing ministers to, allowing the preach word to go forth by way of technology. So did Supervisor Richardson. From where you sit, how can pastors and leaders make sure that coming out of this pandemic, we're not so dependent upon bodies in seats to get the preach word?
You know, again, this pandemic, what it did to us was that it showed, you know, if you were doing what you're supposed to do, when you were supposed to be doing it, you would find that you should have had a multimedia ministry following the time.
But what about little churches who can barely afford to pay the light bill? How are they going to adjust with 6 members and a church that was built in the 40s and truth of the matter, perhaps located in the area of rural America where there's no internet access? How do they adjust to Zoom calls and conference call worship?
Well, let's be clear now. Let me finish it right now. Now, you know, there are different levels, different churches.
Sure.
So in general, we are saying that we have been thrust into an era where technology allows us to do things. But before you had Zoom, before you had internet, you had a phone tree.
There you go.
So that's what I'm saying. You know, for those small churches of which I am well familiar because I am from the Tennessee Annual Conference. That is my home conference. And we have a lot of thriving churches that have less than 30, 20 members. Membership size is not an indicator of membership quality.
That's good.
And so those churches, you know, that don't need to have the big Facebook and the big lights, how do you touch your members? A phone tree. A good pastor touches their people and knows how to touch their people. So if you know your people need you to call them or your stores to call them or you need to have a prayer line, you do those things. I have plenty of small churches that during the pandemic have been able to keep and reach their members. Because at the end of the day, forget the lights, forget the editing, forget all that type of stuff. It's about what do your people need to hear the gospel. So when you ask me, how do we get the people who are in the pews? Now the pews, I say, if you know your people, you know how to get them. And if you know, I got 6 people at the church who have a flip phone, I know I need to have a phone tree so they can call me.
So, John, taking the church to the side for a second in that manner, but let's talk about next year. Let's talk about now. The AME Church, and you've been very important to this piece of the puzzle, has really been strong, engaged, and involved in helping shape policy and making sure that elected leaders know the value and have appreciation for our vote and our voice. Going forward, what does that need to look like?
What it needs to look like is tangible engagement. One of the things that I wish the AME Church would invest more in is a full-time social action department. We have a great director, Dr. DuPont Walker, who has done everything, but let's be clear, she is a volunteer who's given a stipend and has done amazing work to make bricks without straw and mortar. If we're going to be serious policy players, we're going to have to know the language, know the lingo, and engage. And at the same time, we're going to have to mobilize our structure. There's no reason why at every state, every district, the AMEs, but again, good pastoring. If you're a good pastor or a good church, you should know who your council person is. The first time you call your police chief should not be when they shoot a young black boy. You know, we have to realize
Should be some requirements for that.
There are best practices, and we need to teach our pastors and lay leaders what best practices are for community engagement in their area. Because I think one thing the pandemic has shown is that there's some churches who were engaged, and there's some churches that were basically glorified entertainment centers that you showed up in on the Sunday and then drove back home.
That's strong. My last question, because I know you have stuff to do. When your time is up as editor of the Christian Recorder, 1, what's next, but 2, what do you hope to have accomplished?
Well, let's be clear. My career is an academic. So I hope when I leave this job, I will, be a senior or professor or someplace already. Because again, this job, I came to this job. I'm happy to be in this job, but my training is an academic. I did not go to get a PhD in Chicago to be the editor of the Christian Recorder. However, that's my calling. But what I want to leave behind is simply to have the space left better for me, the same way Sidnor left this space better, the same way Ricky Spain left this space better. I can tell you the legacy that what every one of my predecessors has done for the recorder. I inherited a recorder that had a rich online presence and a foundation that I could grow. So when the next editor comes, I want he or she to be able to say, John left me all this that I can grow with.
John Thomas, the editor of the Christian Recorder, my friend. Shout out to Joy and Lauren and the entire team who's made this week such a breeze for people like me and others to do what we do. I'm just so thankful for the collective team we have here at the Christian Recorder, in particular this week. We'll see you soon.
Take care.